Well, it's another beautiful day in the neighborhood, and welcome once again to Bible Talk with Bruce and Becky. We're ready to resume after some unexpected delay. Actually, I've been hoping everybody forget that I'm going to explain all about the rapture today, but I'll do it anywho. Let's look at Revelation chapter 4. We're ready to begin there. A different section of this book. John has been writing the letters to the seven churches in Asia Minor. Now we're ready for a segue into another and the main portion of the book.
You want to remind us who John is?
You know John.
John the Revelator.
The Revelator, John the Revelator. Wrote this book. He saw these visions. That John.
That John.
Okay. Thank you, Becky.
You can go back to lesson 1 on Revelation to hear that discussion, right?
Yes. It's still there. Becky, I'm going to ask you, please, to read chapter 4 of Revelation, the first 6 verses.
After this, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, with one seated on the throne, and he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian. And around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders, clothed in white garments, with golden crowns on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder, and before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was, as it were, a sea of glass like crystal. And around the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind.
All right, thank you. Now, you may have recognized right away that these images are taken from the Old Testament, especially Daniel chapter 7 and the first 2 chapters of Ezekiel, where those prophets see a throne in heaven, or at least a throne with God seated on it. If you didn't recognize that right away, well, I just told you. You can go back and read those if you want. I said we're going to talk about the rapture of the church. This passage is one of the key passages that people who teach a lot about the rapture will use. Becky, let's remind each other and ourselves what we may have heard about or read somewhere about the rapture of the church. First, what does rapture mean?
Uplifting?
That's close. It means to be snatched up or caught up, from a Latin word. And I think I'm correct that you'll not find the word rapture anywhere in any of the English translations of the Bible.
Well, what are you saying that these first 6 verses have to do with rapture?
Yes, I am. Give me time, please. First, we're trying to review what we already know about the rapture. Then I'll show you why this verse is a key verse for those who teach about the rapture. Okay, if something's going to be caught up or snatched up at the rapture, what is it? Well, there are several versions of rapture teaching, but the most popular would say the rapture is a rapture of the church. All believers will be caught up to meet Jesus in the air.
Is that the 144,000?
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
I'm just asking.
I can't answer every question at once. No, the 144,000 are standing on the earth. We'll get to that later on.
Okay.
Supposedly, in most of the rapture teaching, this is a secret rapture. That is, people will disappear, believers, the church will disappear, but others will not know what's happened.
That's not Bible teaching. That's
let's just go a step.
You said most teaching.
Yes, let's go a step at a time, and I will
Elucidate. You're going to
I'm going
elucidate.
to elucidate.
Okay.
You remind me of my middle school Bible students at Boyd Buchanan.
I'm here
They
for
wanna-
some reason or other.
They want to ask and answer everything at once. I prefer to build gradually.
I just want to clarify that when you say most teaching, you're not talking about necessarily biblical teaching.
No, I said those who teach about the rapture.
Okay. All right.
Pay attention here.
Yes, sir.
Your final grade may depend on it.
I'm sure.
On your permanent record.
I'm sure.
I remember when we lived in Texas, I used to see a lot of bumper stickers, or occasional bumper sticker with things like, in case of rapture, there'll be no driver in this car, or people would tell imaginary stories about planes crashing because the pilot had been raptured, and all that kind of thing. Okay, after the rapture, well, there are three different versions of the timing of the rapture. I think most people who believe in this would say rapture comes before the Great Tribulation, and it's to spare the church from going through the Great Tribulation. Others say no, it comes in the middle of the 7-year Great Tribulation, and a few say no, it's at the end of the Great Tribulation. So the church either goes through half of the tribulation or all of it. Most people are pre-tribulation rapture teachers, those who believe this, which I would say is most of the evangelical Bible believers, at least in our part of the country. They may not know why they believe it, but they've heard it so much that they talk about it. Also, somewhere in this whole mix, the Antichrist is revealed. He claims himself to be God and rules briefly over all the earth before Christ destroys him at his coming. Okay, I think that's most of the basics of rapture teaching. Now, you would expect with this kind of scheme, outline of what's going to happen in the future, that there would be several clear passages in the Bible explaining all of this. Wouldn't you expect that? Say yes.
Okay.
But no.
No.
In fact, there is no Bible passage that contains all of these elements. Oh, I left one out. Some also include the return of Israel to their land, which began in 1948 as an important part of leading up to the rapture of the church and what happens afterward.
Are they going to rebuild the temple before or after the rapture?
Yes. Some teach that the temple will be rebuilt, some do not. But remember, step at a time.
Now, are we assuming there is a tribulation?
There is definitely a tribulation
Okay.
in the book of Revelation.
Okay.
But we'll get to that.
Okay.
Good questions you're raising.
Thank you.
As I said, you won't find anywhere in the Bible where all of this is taught together. What happens is people pull one part from here and another part from there, some from the Old Testament, some from the New Testament, some from the Gospels, some from Revelation, some from 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians. None of those passages has all the clear elements that are supposed to happen at the rapture, or even the unclear elements. I have several objections to the popular rapture view, and the main one is it's much too recent to be a part of the church's teaching throughout history. As far as I've been able to find, the first time this rapture kind of teaching is found is in the year 1830, and in England, a man named John Nelson Darby, a famous Bible teacher of the time, founded a group called the Plymouth Brethren, and he began to teach some of this rapture teaching about the end time. It's not clear to me where he got it. I haven't studied his particular writings that much. But where it really started to to take off was around the year 1910 when a man named C.I. Scofield published the Scofield Reference Bible, one of the first and one of the most popular study Bibles of all time, around 1910. And the notes of the Scofield Reference Bible contain the details of this rapture teaching. It raises, for me, one of the objections I have to study Bibles in general. Study Bibles can be very valuable for people who want to learn more about the Bible, but a stumbling block can be people forget what is in the notes and what is in the Bible. I remember as a kid in Arkansas going to church with my grandparents sometime, being in a Sunday school class. They only had one at that time. Everybody was in it, whatever age. A lot of the people had the Johnson's New Testament with notes. When a question would come up about the passage we were studying, people had different views. Somebody would say, well, Johnson says, and that would settle the discussion.
Certainly.
They treated Johnson's notes as if they were on the same authority as the Bible itself. Same kind of thing happened with the Scofield Reference Bible, and in more modern times, the Ryrie, R-Y-R-I-E Study Bible, which comes from the same group of teachers. To me, the 19th and 20th centuries is a little late for such an important doctrine to appear on the scene. Believe it or not, I have read all the excerpts available from commentaries on Revelation for the first 500 years of the church. None of them says anything about the rapture, either here in Revelation 4 or elsewhere. That concept was unknown to them, apparently. I'm a little suspicious of a late blooming doctrine such as that. Also, one of the dispensers of this teaching is the Dallas Theological Seminary in Dallas, Texas, you might guess.
Southern Baptist?
No, it's an independent seminary, but it's the largest Protestant seminary in the world. And it teaches what's called dispensationalism, which is a form of the rapture teaching. So, although some of the younger teachers have begun to modify that lately in later years. Well, that's enough in the way of background. It's probably got everybody confused enough to start with. Let's look at another passage in 1 Thessalonians, which is often invoked for rapture teaching, and it is the only passage where you would find the word translated rapture in the Latin Bible. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, beginning in verse 13. 1 Thessalonians 4:13.
You want me to read that?
Read 13 through 18, please, ma'am.
But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. For this we declare to you by a word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. So we'll be caught up.
Caught up, that's your rapture in verse 17. When St. Jerome translated the Latin Bible, which is known as the Vulgate, he used a Latin word that means, from which we get the word rapture, and it means to be caught up. That's where rapture comes from. although no English Bible I've consulted has the word rapture in that verse. Well, if you remember from the book of Acts, if not, I'll give a brief summary. Paul and his associates came to Thessalonica in northern Greece and Macedonia, and had a very good reception from the people there of the gospel preaching, but also opposition arose, largely from the Jewish people in the city, and Paul had to leave hurriedly lest he be attacked or arrested. He's a little bit concerned about the Thessalonians. They were new Christians. So he writes them two letters that we call 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. He had sent Timothy, I believe, there to follow up on the work, and Timothy brought some questions that were disturbing the church at Thessalonica. So Paul had taught them that the Lord would return from heaven, but they were apparently confused about what would happen with those who died before he came back. Some of their members had died, and they want to know, will they share in the coming of Christ and the things that follow? So Paul says in verse 13, we don't want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who are asleep. He says again in where does he say about those who are asleep? Oh, verse 14, he will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. Some people say that death is literally a sleep until the resurrection, but this seems to be a common euphemism for people who have died. They appear to be asleep. Paul doesn't want them to be uninformed. I remember somebody joking about that verse in the King James Bible where it says, we would not have you ignorant brethren. It's comma in the wrong place. We would not have you ignorant brethren. Okay, enough of my foolishness, and then some. Now this supposedly is describing the secret rapture according to rapture teachers.
The secret rapture?
Well, it says in
the voice of an archangel, the sound of a trumpet.
Yeah, somebody's called verse 16 the loudest verse in the New Testament. The Lord descends with a cry of command, the voice of an archangel, and the sound of the trumpet of God.
Somewhere else it says, every eye will see him.
Well, the rapture people would say that's after the millennium, which is the final coming. The coming at the rapture is not the second coming. Well, it's not the final coming for judgment. I have a book in my library where there are charts from these guys explaining exactly what happens when they have as many as 3 resurrections taking place. But it gets pretty complicated. Suffice it to say here in Thessalonians, this is not a secret coming of the Lord. And the dead in Christ meet him first in the air, then we who are alive at his coming will be caught up to meet him in the air, and will be forever with the Lord. The question is, what happens after we meet him in the air?
We just hang around in the clouds with our harps.
No, I don't think so. The rapture people would have to say we go back to heaven with him. But the language used here, Professor F. Bruce, a famous New Testament scholar, among others, has pointed out, the language is used that was common for the visit of an emperor to one of the cities of the empire. And the leaders of the city would go out to meet him and then escort him back into the city. That language seems to be adapted here by Paul. The same thing happens to Paul himself, by the way, at the end of the book of Acts when he is going to Rome. The leaders of the church in Rome come to meet him at the port and escort him into the city. Apparently it's suggested here, implied, that we will meet the Lord in the air and then we will descend to him, with him to the earth, where I believe he will set up his millennial kingdom for 1,000 years. But we'll get to the millennium later when it comes up in chapter 20 of Revelation.
Man is full of revelation.
You have sat through several classes where I've taught that in detail, but it may have vanished from your memory. Okay, but a lot of stuff is missing here that's included in the rapture teaching. It doesn't say anything about a secret rapture. Uh, doesn't say anything about a great tribulation. And later on, we're not going to look at it right now, but we'll go into chapter 5 about times and seasons. When do we know this is going to happen? Paul says concerning times and seasons, brothers and sisters, you have no need to have anything written to you. That doesn't mean he's already explained it all to them when the date will be. But he says, you yourselves are fully aware the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. That is, it will be unexpected. Well, I'm just going to mention another series of rapture passages that are often used from the Gospels. These have to do with the destruction of the Jerusalem temple by the Romans and the coming of Christ sometime after that. You'll find those in Luke chapter 21.
There's something in Matthew, too.
Yes, Matthew chapter 24 and Mark chapter 13. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all contain a version of this teaching, which is sometimes called the Olivet Discourse, because Christ is on the Mount of Olives teaching his disciples. Sometimes called the Little Apocalypse, because it talks about destruction coming to Jerusalem.
It's just a little.
Yeah, it's not the big apocalypse like in Revelation. It's brief but terrible. Jesus is teaching here after he and his apostles have left the temple in Jerusalem, which was apparently a marvelous structure, as Herod had had it rebuilt. In fact, some consider it the most beautiful temple in the Roman world. And ironically enough, shortly after it was finished, the Romans destroyed it. The disciples point out the beautiful temple and they say, look at the splendor of this temple, to paraphrase. Jesus says, you see all this? I tell you that not one stone will be left here upon another. In other words, this marvelous temple will be totally destroyed. Well, they ask, well, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming? They ask really two separate questions. When will the Romans, although they don't put it that way, destroy the temple? And when will you come back, and how will we know to expect you? Jesus answers with a lot of information about the destruction of the temple, but nothing really about signs of his coming. He says of that day and hour, no one knows, not the angels in heaven, not even the Son, but the Father only. I think there's been a lot of misinterpretation of these passages in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because they take all of it as applying to the second coming. Well, where does the rapture get into this one? Well, Jesus warns them to be ready when they see the abomination of desolation set up where it should not be. I'm not going to try to explain that in this lesson. It comes from the book of Daniel. But Luke interprets it somewhat by saying, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, flee. Jesus teaches them several things about running and getting out of Jerusalem before it's too late. Now, if that's the rapture, folks, where are they running from? And where are they going to go?
And pray that it won't be in winter. I remember that
That's
much.
right. He says, pray that your flight will not come in winter. Don't go down into your house if you're on the rooftop to get anything. Because if you're out plowing in the field, one will be taken and another left. And he says that a couple of times, and that's where the rapture folks say, see, some will be secretly raptured. No, no, no. He's talking about getting out of Jerusalem before they're trapped by the Romans and the terrible tribulation that will follow and be a part of the Roman siege. It'll be hard for pregnant women in those days still. Why will it be hard for them? Because they're going to have to make a quick getaway. It shouldn't be in the winter because not only will it be bad weather, but the wadis, the temporary rivers, will be flooded. It'll be hard to travel. But church history tells us that Christians in Jerusalem, they heard about it, saw the Roman army approaching, they got out of Jerusalem, fled to a village not far away called Pella, and none of the Christians went through the suffering of the Roman siege. Well, that gives us a start on some of these questions and issues. Personally, I believe the rapture refers to us being called up to heaven when Jesus comes back, and none of this other stuff is involved, including the return of the Jews to Israel. Unfortunately, I won't have to study that much, teach that much in the book of Revelation about that. But I will say, just to whet everybody's appetite for further teaching, I don't believe there's anything in the Bible about the return of the Jews to Israel in 1948. But all the land promises to Israel were made either to Abraham and involved the settling of the Holy Land by the Jews then, or after the captivity in Babylon when they're promised that they can come back. After they return from Babylon, no further land promises apply. But on that note, I hope you'll tune in again to learn more in the future. We'll tell you, I told you everything I know about the rapture, and even more in this lesson. But I hope it made some sense to you, and we hope you'll be with us next time. And remember, don't spend money. God bless you.